morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to Global Atheist News Roundup, dateline 1st of April 2023. This week's headlines. Israel's Netanyahu meets Sunak at Downing Street amid protests. Mass Israel protests after Netanyahu fires defense minister. Netanyahu pauses judicial reform after striking a deal with Ben Gvir. Afghanistan girls' education begins a new term of not being educated. Lebanon reverses the decision on daylight saving amid confusion on two different time zones. The Anti-Homosexuality Bill in Uganda was criticised by South African parties. The Vatican rejects the Discovery Doctrine. A commission says bishops should be removed from the House of Lords. An American child is named the reincarnation of the Buddhist spiritual leader. A church worker is threatened with termination for refusing to tithe. LGBTQ Americans tend to be younger and have no religion. Blessing the war machine. Some news stories develop very rapidly, and Global Atheist News responds with these short midweek bulletins. On Saturday, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak met Benjamin Netanyahu at Downing Street as the Israeli leader was facing domestic turmoil over his judicial reforms. The reforms include plans that would give the government decisive control over the committee which appoints judges. Mr. Sunak greeted Mr. Netanyahu outside number 10 before talks over security and the threat from Iran. Hundreds of protesters gathered at the gates of Downing Street to demonstrate against the Israeli PM's policies. There was a cacophony, including shouts of shame and traitor, as Mr. Netanyahu made the short walk from his convoy to the steps of number 10. A planned photo opportunity for the media at the start of the talks was cancelled, and there was no joint statement. The visit came at a time of political turmoil in Israel, when the country being gripped by months of some of the biggest demonstrations in its history. Mr. Netanyahu had defied calls to scrap a shake-up of the legal system amid warnings that the crisis is not only causing social upheaval, but could harm Israel's security. Growing numbers of military reservists were refusing to serve in protest. By Monday, tens of thousands of people had taken to the streets across Israel after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu fired his defense minister. Yoav Gallant had spoken out against controversial plans to overhaul the judicial system, and in Jerusalem, police and soldiers used water cannon against demonstrators near Mr. Netanyahu's house. Early on Monday morning, Israel's President Isaac Herzog called on the government to halt the reforms. For the sake of the unity of the people of Israel, for the sake of responsibility, I call on you to stop the legislative process immediately, he said on Twitter, adding that the eyes of all the people of Israel are on you. The US also said it was deeply concerned about the developments and called for a compromise. See this video.
We are going to protect the democracy. We are here for the democracy. BB is not here for the democracy.
Feels to many people here
like a turning point. It feels like a moment when Benjamin Netanyahu needs to try and keep this country in order.
Later on Monday, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu temporarily suspended his plans for judicial reform after his coalition partner announced that a deal has been struck to keep the governing coalition together. In a televised address to the Israeli people, Netanyahu quoted the biblical story of King Solomon to emphasize that the country should come together and celebrate Pesach instead of allowing the discord to continue. Protesters and supporters of Netanyahu's government gathered in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem in their thousands, with their organisers signalling that the brief respite in the bill's process through the Knesset would not mean the end of their protests. Itamar Ben Gvir, the controversial national security minister from the Otzma Yehudit party, the fundamentalist right-wing end, announced this afternoon that he would continue to support Netanyahu's coalition after previously threatening to walk out if the judicial reform bill was paused or suspended. Meanwhile, in Canada, a rail company apologised after a staff member in Ottawa said that a Muslim was bothering customers by praying. Ahmed told the BBC of his shock at the tense interaction inside the train station in the Canadian capital. See this video.
Is this a nightmare? Like, am I really going through this?
Don't bring here. We don't want you praying here. You're bothering our other customers, okay?
One person had anything to see. Not one person had anything to see.
There's not one person I went to the end of the hallway. Not one person had anything to say. Not one person had anything to
Pray
say.
outside next time, okay?
In the cold, when I'm inside here.
Pray outside.
No.
I'm going to complain to your employer.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I came right here, okay, with my prayer mat. I laid it out flat. Okay, I'm right here, okay? Boom. Empty. Empty. What was I doing that was so wrong? I don't understand. How is, like, this is Canada?
I was just so in shock at the fact that, like, what made you come with that confidence to speak to me like that? That could have been anybody, Jewish, Christian, Hindu, whatever your faith, whatever your religion may be, that could have been you.
One person had anything to say. Not had anything to
Pray
say.
outside next time, okay?
In the cold, when I'm inside here.
Willingly, you should put in a multi-faith room and be proud of it. So all religions, all faiths can be able to practice freely and really just be Canadians.
I'll return to the news after this brief announcement. Free Thought Channel has a new musical director, Australian Ben Gvir. This is the sort of thing he can do.
This is probably going to be the most simplest one for you to answer, but what if you're wrong?
Well, what if I'm wrong? I mean, anybody could be wrong. We could all be wrong about the flying spaghetti monster and the pink unicorn and the flying teapot. You happen to have been brought up, I would presume, in the Christian faith. You know what it's like not to believe in a particular faith.
Back to the news. 17-year-old Habiba says, "Every day I wake up with the hope of going back to school. The Taliban keep saying they will open schools, but it's been almost 2 years now. I don't believe them. It breaks my heart. She blinks and bites her lip, trying hard not to tear up. Habiba and her former classmates Matab and Tamana are among hundreds of thousands of teenage girls who have been barred from attending secondary school in most of Afghanistan, the only country to take such action. 1.5 years since their lives were brought to a halt, their grief is still raw. The girls say they fear that global outrage over what's happened to them is fading, even though they live with the pain every day, intensified this week with another school term starting without them. When I see the boys going to school and doing whatever they want, it really hurts me. I feel very bad. When I see my brother leaving for school, I feel broken, says Tamana. Her voice trembles and tears roll down her cheeks. Lebanon's government has walked back a controversial decision to delay clock changes by a month after last week's announcement by caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati sparked exasperation and confusion in a country already gripped by economic crisis. Mikati's plan to postpone daylight saving until April the 20th, following the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, rather than introducing it on March the 25th, was rejected by several churches and media organisations and caused chaos in a population that woke up to 2 different time zones. However, the Lebanese leader said his government had since voted to adopt daylight saving time starting on Wednesday, in adding that the decision was taken after calm discussions. We now go to South Africa to hear from our correspondent in the Western Cape. Hello, Tercia. How are you?
I am fantastic, John. We have autumn in the Western Cape. The weather is balmy. It's beautiful. Unfortunately, the news from Africa in general is not so very good, especially not if you are homosexual or queer. Most of our viewers are by now aware of the Uganda Anti-Homosexuality Bill. So what's happened regarding that in South Africa is absolute deafening silence from the South African government. So in South Africa, while the EFF, the DA and ActionSA have all condemned Uganda's anti-homosexuality bill, the ANC and the South African government is completely silent. For a little bit of background, the Economic Freedom Fighters, or the EFF, is a far left-wing radical political party, and even they have issued a statement on Friday speaking out against the legislation that threatens to jail and even execute LGBTIQ plus people and their allies in the East African country, describing it as inhumane and rooted in religious fundamentalism. The bill passed in Uganda is a massive step backwards for Africa and a gross violation of human rights, said the EFF. They continued with the stigma and hatred towards the LGBTQI plus community, not only in Africa, but across the world, infringes on the rights of individuals to identify as they see fit and express their sexuality without fear of persecution, contended the party. It is completely irrational, as it's based on homophobic and baseless rhetoric, which collates sexual crimes with queer identity. In its own statement, the Democratic Alliance, or the DA, expressed its disappointment at the silence on both the South African government and the African Union in not calling out Uganda for passing the anti-homosexuality bill. They said in a statement, "It is so often that South Africa is quick to talk about human rights atrocities around the world, but when their own continent is pushing us back into the dark ages, they are embarrassingly silent," said MP Darren Bergman. So, John, on that sad note, I hand back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Tercia. The Vatican on Thursday, March the 30th, responded to indigenous demands and formally repudiated the doctrine of discovery, the theories backed by 15th century papal bulls that legitimized the colonial era seizure of native lands and that form the basis of some property laws still today. A Vatican statement said the papal bulls or decrees did not adequately reflect the equal dignity and rights of indigenous peoples and have never been considered expressions of the Catholic faith. The statement from the Vatican's Development and Education offices marked a historic recognition of the Vatican's own complicity in colonial-era abuses committed by European powers and was issued as history's first Latin American pontiff who has made remarkable apologies to native peoples was hospitalized with a respiratory infection. Indigenous leaders welcomed the statement, even though it continued to take some distance from acknowledging actual Vatican culpability. Bishops should no longer sit as of right in the House of Lords, a Commission on Political Reform has said. The Commission on Political Power has said Church of England bishops are an anomalous presence in the House of Lords and recommended their removal in a reformed second chamber. Currently, 2 Church of England archbishops and 24 bishops are given seats in the upper house on the bishop's bench and are able to vote on legislation. The National Secular Society said it was indefensible to maintain the status quo, with the 2021 YouGov polling showing only 16% of the public believe bishops should be given seats automatically. The Commission said reform of the House is urgently needed, with many questioning its undemocratic nature and legitimacy within Britain's political system. A Mongolian boy born in the USA has been named as the reincarnation of the 3rd most important spiritual leader in Tibetan Buddhism by the Dalai Lama. The faith's spiritual leader has been pictured with the 8-year-old boy taking part in a ceremony in Dharamshala in the Indian state of Himachal Pradesh, where the Dalai Lama, who is 87, lives in exile, and it recognized him as the 10th Kalka Jetson Dampa Rinpoche. Give back 10% of your wages or you're fired, says a megachurch in Washington. It's under fire for allegedly threatening its employees with termination unless they tithe to the church. In other words, they will lose their jobs unless they return 10% of their income to the church through the offering plate. For the most part, religious Americans say their LGBTQ neighbours should be free of discrimination when they are at work, in public, or at home. This is true even among groups that oppose same-sex marriage. One place where they do disagree is over whether businesses, such as cake bakers or other vendors, ever have the right to refuse service. On that issue, Americans are split along religious and party lines. Meanwhile, almost half of LGBTQ Americans are young and claim no religion. Those are among the findings of a report on polarization and LGBTQ rights from the Washington, D.C.-based Public Religion Research Institute. The report looked at the views of 22,984 adults living in all 50 states. Finally, I'd like you to see this photo of a Russian Orthodox priest blessing a warplane. Form your own opinions. This week's Free Thought Hour guest is Nathan Lentz, a professor at City University, New York, who specializes in the evolution of the human genome. Stay on this channel to find out what that is all about. And don't forget to watch Views on the News, our panel show about this very news. This has been Global Atheist News. The GAN team will be back next week. Thanks for watching.